สวัสดีครับ Welcome everyone and Happy New Year to you. Welcome to the first director briefing of 2023 and today we are going to be talking about integration, the forgotten cousin of M&A, but before that, my name is Kulvech Janvatanavit, the CEO of Thai-IOD. Before we start, I would like to ask you, if you have any question, go to chat and send your question to all panelists, and I'll make sure that your question will be addressed. Today we have a special guest, and he used to work in many companies that has gone through merger and acquisition. Without any further ado, his name is Roland Lawrence, and he used to work for CARLSBERG Asia as a CFO, but no one can introduce him better than he himself. So, hello, Sawadee Krap, Roland.
Sawadee Krap, and good afternoon, Kun Kulvech and directors in the Institute of Directors. First and foremost, thank you for inviting me to join you today to present Integration, the Forgotten Cousin of M&A. I'll start by introducing myself. So I'll just go to my slides, if you wouldn't mind for a second. I just need to go to the slide and I will share with you in a second.
Sure. Oh, by the way, while we're waiting for the slide of Kun Roland, Kun Roland is a genius, and a lot of genius talk very fast because they think very fast. So if anyone feel that the conversation was the speaking was too fast, please type in and I'll make sure that Kun Roland slow down.
Thank you. First of all, start with myself. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roland Lawrence. I've worked for three major companies. The one that I just retired from is as the CFO of CARLSBERG Asia, where we grew the business from about $200 million profit to just over $750 million profit. Part of it was we did a major acquisition in a company called Chongqing Breweries, which I'd like to share with you. Prior to that, I worked for about 3.5 years with Walmart as the SVP and CFO of Walmart China. Wonderful story again. We purchased 100 stores from a company called 𝗬𝗲𝗄. So it was an integration and fast growth plan in China. And before that, for about 20 years, I worked for the CARLSBERG Group in Australia, where I worked in many different branches that included Kmart, Target, Myer, the Coles supermarket, and then finally into the CARLSBERG Group. I'll share a little bit of that in a while, but probably the most thing I'm most proud of is the fact that I've had the opportunity to start as a trainee. So I have done executive roles and also board roles, and have seen M&A from all points of view, especially how it turns on the operational side, which is where integration becomes an important part.
Thank you, Roland. But why, curiously, why did you use the word forgotten cousin?
Yes, it's a great question, because I can't help but think of an M&A. When you ask somebody what about the M&A, they'll talk to you about the merchant bankers, the lawyers, they'll talk about the negotiations, the deal, the financing. It's very exciting, but that's all just the first part. And then someone might say, yes, we even had to do the public announcement to much applause, and everyone loves that. It reminds me of the New Year's Day party. Everyone's there to wish you Happy New Year. And then they go home and leave the bottles of wine, the half-eaten food, the plates that have to be cleaned up, and no one is there. Thankfully, cousin Eddie is there to help you clean up because he's a teetotaler.
You know what, Roland? I just I have another analogy, which is the M&A itself is a wedding reception, but you know, we need to think about the whole marriage. And you know, just a few days ago, my daughter got married, and then after that, after a few days after that, I told her, okay, let's stop talking about the wedding and focusing on the marriage.
It's a very good point. I think here's the key point down here. The wedding is an important part, the first part of the structure, but it's the marriage that's going to be the long-term impact. And integration is about the long-term driving of value for the company.
Yep.
So I'll just start with down here by asking ourselves about the challenges that directors face regarding M&A. And the most unspoken one is almost like an embarrassing question. Should I be questioning the executives on their strategic growth plans? Am I overstepping my mark when I question some of the details of the strategy? And should I be reviewing outcomes on a regular basis, or is that the domain of executives and we directors shouldn't be involved? The short answer is you must. There are two key reasons down here, and it's a third. The first one is that it's about the company's strategic direction, in which it is the purview of the directors. It's very important that you understand the strategic direction, and M&A is a very major step that you're taking into the company's growth. Secondly, it's also about risk and risk management. When you go in an M&A, you're probably spending 100 million. In the case of, I said some of the deals have done about $1 billion US. You're changing the leveraging for the company. You are investing in a foreign site. Suddenly you're talking about multiple risks that you need to manage. And these are questions that you need to probe into to get there. But the third point I would say down here is that in asking these questions, you actually help the executives. You help them hone and focus on what is important for their success. It's difficult, but this is the key test of being a good leader as a director. So when I come back and look at this, when we look at the perils of remaining corporate in corporate HQ, the first thing I'll say to you down here is that strategy does not end at the boardroom table, but must become operational and measurable. So, and one of the dangers I always say is the death by PowerPoint. You get the merchant bankers showing you the wonderful slides, the geopolitical stretch. Suddenly your company logo is in 6 countries, and you feel the feel-good factor is unbelievable. But the real work is actually in the detail. So don't fall in love with the strategic concept. Demand the details. All right. And I want to warn down here, say, at this stage, we all tend to be in the boardroom and someone says, this is a strategic growth imperative. Oh, this will drive synergies. We can get expanded bandwidth, or we can pivot the business into a global business. And you can see everyone nodding their heads, but nobody's sure exactly what does that mean.
Yeah. Kun Roland, it sounds really, really exciting. I just want to point out that this session, we are going to be learning what directors should do,
Yes.
M&A and integration,
Yes.
and how deep should they go, and how deep is too deep, right?
Yes, correct. That's exactly the point I was trying to say down here. But what I'm suggesting to you down here, it is always better to err on the side of caution than to sit back and not sagely like, oh yes, synergy, yes, bandwidth, and then try not to get into the questions, because it's the questions that will help formulate a good integration plan and increase the success of this M&A deal, right? And I think it starts by understanding the risk, knowing what needs to be done and measuring results. So if you don't have measures on each stage, you'll find that at the end of it, 2 years later, you go, what happened? So it's always better to have a regular follow-up, agreed points of review, so that you know what's right, what could be done better, what do we have to change in our thinking. And this is what we're going to do on looking at the director's duties in integration plans, all right? We'll look in detail at 2. One is the CARLSBERG integration, and the other one is the Chongqing integration plan as examples. I believe there's a question. No?
No, there's no question right now.
Good.
So,
All right, I will start by what I suggest are 5 principles on integration. These are the 5 I would say to you. Number 1, as a director, understand the value drivers and risk. Understand them. Very important. Understand the value drivers and risk. Number 2, deep dive into culture, geographic, and consumer dynamics. Number 3, focus on cash. Focus on cash, not the P&L, because this is really important. When you do an NPV, you are actually, or you're doing a review of the company on valuation, you're looking at discounted cash flows, but you start looking at P&L, you should be looking at the cash drive that's coming through as part and parcel of the integration. Right? Number 4, just remember, integration is the long game. We said it's the marriage, not the wedding day. The wedding day, you can count down the 100 days, but the marriage could be 50 years. And it's very important that we get this right. Integration often takes about 6 to 7 years to complete the entire M&A deal. Right? And number 5, as directors, the difficult part is we must deal with underperformance. I will come to that in a while, but it's a difficult, problematic thing, but we as directors have to take responsibility and help the executives when there's underperformance. Let's cut through. Yes.
Question. Number 5, prepare to handle underperformance. Does it mean understand when the marriage does not work and we have to split? Is that right?
It's more than that. It starts with, if you know that it's not as successful as you planned. I use a simple example. You have a plan to achieve 15% ROIC, but you're only getting 4. So you need to start getting the management to focus to move it to 8. It's never going to be 15. You've missed that chance to be 15, but we do not let it languish at 4. Move it at least above your cost of capital if you can. And if you can't get it past that, then consider exiting.
Okay, work it out first.
Try. Okay. And like you'll see later on, my comment is that if you don't focus on underperformance, everybody wants to sweep it under the carpet because I've got a new deal for you. That's what happens. So it's very important that you've got to get the management also focus on improving what they can. All right. But also be aware there's some dangers in that. So let's start with the first one, which is understand the value drivers and risk. Number 1, start and insist on an integration plan. You start during due diligence to foment your integration plan. Get your executives to do that. Now, it's very important. You're doing the due diligence, but the crazy part about it is this one, is know and probe the risk. All right. What's interesting is often when you do this, you get your tax, your environmental, legal, people, and consumer risk being reviewed. And what happens is that you get advisors who come back, yes, there's a tax risk of $10 million. And then someone might say there's an environmental risk of $20 million. And the first thing the merchant bankers tell you is reduce it from the valuation. And everybody goes, yes. And everybody's excited, which is great. But now comes the bigger question that you should ask yourself. How are we going to deal with this risk? What are we going to do to remove this risk? Because we don't want it in our business for the length of the time that we have it. Okay, we know the problem. We have discounted it, but now we need to act on it. There needs to be a plan on the risk. That's the key point I want to say down here. You just can't let it sweep it under the carpet. Do something about it. Okay. The second down here is that you need to understand the major elements of the financial plan and measure progress. So when someone says to you, like, especially when you look at the NPV, right? And someone says, oh, you're going to make $100 million. And then you go, how? And they go, oh, we're going to have sales CAGR of 20%. We're going to have gross margins growing by 500 basis points. And cost is going to go down by 200 basis points. And everybody goes, oh, yes. And therefore, profit goes up by 50%. And everybody goes, yes, very good. It sounds good. But you need to go that one level further. How are you going to drive the sales by 25%? How are you going to get 500 basis points more in your margin? What's different? And it could come down to procurement. Oh, you're going to make procurement savings. So you need to have a procurement integration plan. How much, when, and who's going to do it? This is an important part. When you said your cost is going to be reduced, the head office is going to be, we can standardize and we can make the back office smaller. Great. Who's doing it? When's it going to be done? When are the systems going to be changed? How much, when, and how many people? These are all questions that you need to get into. If you don't ask these questions, it becomes yes, we're going to do 50 basis points, 100 basis points, but there's very little substance. The second point on here is that it takes time. So some of the benefits happen now, some will happen 2 years later, but you need to keep measuring it so that you know where you are. Okay? The last point I put down there is that know your terminal value NPVs. I can't help but notice that when you look at the NPV, it tends to be a 10-year or discounted cash flow calculation. They do 10 years and then they do terminal value. So you can get $100 million with only $10 million in the first 10 years, and 90 million in the terminal value after year 10. I'm not saying it's wrong, as long as you know what is happening. A good example of this is telecommunications business. Laying the cables is a very major part. So there's continuous costs happening in year 1 to year 10. But after the rollout, you'll find that in terms of cash flow, the benefit starts coming in year 7, 8, 9, 10, and much later after that, because the cables are there. You got it for 25 years. But be aware that most businesses should be able to turn cash positive around 3rd or 4th year mark, if not by the 6th year mark. You just got to be careful about plans that say they happen in the long-term future. All right. So understand what's happening in the first 10 years and what's happening in the terminal value. So let's now go to the second point, which is a deep dive into culture, geographic, and consumer dynamics. I think for me, culture is one of the most underrated challenges. We are actually seeing one in real time. It's called Twitter. All right. We have 7,000 people there. We have a new owner, Elon Musk. We had a collegial atmosphere where everybody sat and had coffee and probably a bit of yoga sessions before they decided what they wanted to do for the day. To a hardcore driven person who brings in a a bathroom sink to say he's going to literally sink everything. And in the first week, he fires 3,800 of them. I mean, this is what I call change management at the most extreme. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just stating down here that what's the plan to convert the culture? And you might go, oh yes, it won't happen to me. How many of us are going to buy family businesses? And you know that Father Lin has been the patriarch of the business. And now you bought the business and everybody knows you are the new owner. And then you decide that you want to change the branding and nothing happens because we haven't heard from Father Lin. He hasn't said anything, so we're not doing anything. You bought the business, but they're still waiting for Father Lin or Grandfather Lin to make the decisions. You see, this is a changeover that you need to consider. How do you bring about that change, that culture, so that people understand it's a drive, it's a change? You'll see later on in Chongqing, it was a communist party that owned the Chongqing brewery. So they actually won awards and accolades for production. Never mind if they didn't sell it, but they produced lots and therefore they got big prizes. We have to now change it to it's about sales and good profitability. It took about 4 years to get to that changeover. So we'll talk about that also as an example. The second one I want to talk about is geographic reach. How do you overcome the tyranny of distance? Part of the difficulty, like I say, is that when you take over a business, you lose the informal conversation. I can't help but say how great I have. It's a privilege for me to have this video conference with you, but it does not beat being in the same room with you. Imagine a typical situation. You might ask me, hey, Roland, have you thought about this question? If it's over coffee, I might probably say, you know the truth, I haven't. It's quite frightening. I didn't think about it. It's a great question. But because it's over the video, I'm most probably like, of course I did. It's irrelevant. See the difference in the behavior? I'm saying that this is something that you've got to come to terms with. Even if you have regular calls, are you getting the whole picture? You need to be able to see from the ground roots how things are happening. No one intends to lie. It's just that the distance makes it difficult to be close and understand each other's requirements. Third one I want to talk about is consumer profile and branding. Now, it's very common that you assume that you have a strategic fit, or my brand is superior, my brand X. After all, I sell in Thailand to 60 million customers. They are only a 6 million nation country, so I'm 10 times bigger. My brand is better. There's a tendency to do that, but you could ask yourself, how different is the target market to your core business? How do you obtain synergies in this differentiated world. And be wary of consumer revolutions whereby you say, I'm changing all the brands to my Thai brand. All right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but let's try and understand it. I'll look at 𝗁𝘁𝗲𝗴𝗁𝘁, but before I do that, I want to share one called Thumbs Up. Notice it doesn't even have a B. Its name is Thumbs Up. It's a brand of cola drinks. In 1994, Coca-Cola bought this brand in India. And I suspect, no one will say it for clear, but I've been reading the research. It seems to say that they originally wanted to kill the brand and put in their Coca-Cola. But they realized very quickly that this brand had resonance. It had a flavor that was better with their spicy food. The customers loved it, and they actually went and supported it. Today, it's a $1 billion business, and it has 20% of the market share. I mean, when you look at that, how did that happen? It's so quick, but they did this because they realized this is an important brand. They didn't look down at it and said, stupid name, doesn't even have a B in the word thumbs. They didn't say, Coca-Cola, I'm the greater company, you have to change to my brand. They actually realized it's what the consumers wanted. So they kept it. Today, it has 20% of the market share, and it's done $1 billion in revenue turnover. That is an example of don't let your ego get in the way. Listen to what the market wants. Okay. Let's look now on cash. What did I say about cash and focus on cash and not the P&L? The interesting thing is, I'll come back again. When you look at discounted cash flow, you're looking at cash flow. At the moment you take over the company, everybody applauds you, and then you give executives P&L targets. You must get profit here, profit there. You do that, and you'll find that the behavior changes because they don't reveal the problems. Every deal has skeletons, all right? In Chongqing, you'll see the first thing I had to deal with was paying a $36 million environmental fine. But sometimes getting rid of it is better than to try to delay and end up being stuck in a vicious cycle. So, number one, deal with non-performing assets. You're going to buy this, and you know that some of the breweries or some of the factories or some of the stores are totally uneconomic. Close them, shut them down, or do what you need to do, sell the land. The point on here is that you clear the guff. They don't end up dealing with something that they know they can't do anything. They say, this is a hopeless store. I am still keeping it only because the boss doesn't want any stores closed, or they think the directors don't want any stores closed because they bought 100 stores, so I can't close any. Deal with the issues. The key down here is that you need to emphasize on cash. And this is what I mean. If you clear old stock, you write it down, it hits the P&L. Terrible in the P&L. But you've already paid for it in cash. So now it's cash in this year. It becomes cash positive as part of the NPV. All right. So when you sell non-performing assets at a loss, you'll still generate positive cash flows. All right. The other danger is what I call when your accountants become magicians, and they help you make it hocus pocus, disappear away from the P&L by adjusting it all into what we call a purchase price adjustment and fatten the goodwill. Yep, you got away with it this year, next year, but the problem is that your ROIC grinds because now you've got so much assets that are actually non-performing. All right, it's a bloated goodwill. I would suggest, again, clear the items. If I give you an example of a few, is TPG Maya. Texas Pacific Group bought Maya in 2006. They paid $900 million for the business. And they turned around and said, and they took on about $700 million worth of debt, typical private equity. The first thing they did was they had a whole lot of stock that Maya couldn't clear because they didn't want to take the profit and loss hit. So they said, I'm selling it. In terms of profit, it was negative $100 million for that year. In terms of cash, it was $100 million coming in. So they sold it for $100 million, plus they managed to close 48 small warehouses they were renting around the CBDs. They were expensive. They shut that down, and it reduced their cost by another $20 million. That cash they used to pay off the debt. The next thing they did was they sold the property also and got $500 million. Basically, they bought the entire deal almost for nothing. They sold it for $4 billion in about 4 years later. That's an example of what I mean by their mind was focused. That's something about private equity. They're very, very focused. I'll share with you later on the Chongqing example on bottles and the Eastern assets. Number 4, integration is a very long game. Measure the results in stages. And I would suggest measure it from agreed KPI. Start by having 100 days, 200 days. What are we setting out to do in the first 100 days? And then review. Have we done it? If not, why? What have we learned? What can we do better? What do we need to do to get the results that we want to? All right. And this integration plan can take 5 years or more. Think about it. You want to change processes and systems. That means you're changing general ledger, you're changing the ERP systems, you're changing finance procedures, admin, your IT, your logistics network, your distribution. These are very long and complex. It doesn't happen in the first year. So always keep in mind. The one that I probably am most fascinated with is about people. Because I mentioned just now, Twitter's firing half the people in the first week, and then now it looks as if they're trying to re-employ half of the people that they fired. But that's an example of when you have what I call a dynamic, probably violent kind of change management strategy. I would say to you, what is the change management? You are bringing in your experts, your best people from Thailand. They're going into this new country or new business. When is this business going to be independent to be able to function without your core team that may have to go to the next country? So you're going to build in what I call the local management team. And I'm going to ask this question. When is the local management team going to be 100% of the business? All right. Who's measuring and driving that change to make sure that the culture and the people are built in that country that you have gone into, so that you can now go to the next country or next acquisition, right? So I'm going to stop at this point so that if you have any questions, I wouldn't mind answering them right now before I go into the 2 examples I wish to share with on the CARLSBERG rapid integration and also on Chongqing Brewery. I'll stop at this point. Are there any questions, please?
Sure. Kun Roland, some question here. Can you go to number 1, please?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we say integration plan, what does a good integration plan look like?
Okay. So first of all, it has a time frame. In the first 100 days, what are you going to do? And it breaks it down into each group. Everybody knows what they're doing. So the sales team, what they're going to do? The market research team, a market team might not be changing the branding, but they'll be doing market research in the first 100 days and come back with a report that this is what they found. An example will be the people plan that you have assessed who are the talent, first round of talent, and whom you think will not be able to achieve the next phase. And the 200-day plan might say, and we will exit these people and promote the following. So this is an example. So it's a people plan. There's a procurement plan, there's a supply chain plan, there's a sales plan, there's a finance plan. And the first 100 days might be just assessing which locations am I going to change first. You see in Chongqing, we actually couldn't change the financial systems and the ERP systems in all the locations. But in the first year, we changed the 6 most important locations because they were 80% of the results. So we wanted to focus on them first.
So Kun Roland, wow, that was very insightful. So does it mean that in case of Thumbs Up and Coca-Cola, they in the first maybe 200 days, they with the marketing research went out and realized that actually that brand is like deep in the heart of the consumer, and the taste is so complement with the local food. So is that like something that they did not realize before? And maybe at the first place, they thought that the value driver is one thing, but then they just discovered that the value driver is another thing.
You know, that's exactly what I was trying to get at. sometimes you may go with a plan. I don't know this plan. I don't have the Coca-Cola plan. But from what I've read, it appeared that they bought it and they were going to transform it into all the sites to become Coca-Cola breweries. But the marketing team came back and said, don't do that. What we found is the customers actually find better value in thumbs up, their taste profile, they prefer it. And we can build on it by putting a complement of Coca-Cola with thumbs up so that we sell two brands rather than just one. I mean, that could have been I don't know but that happened for me in Chongqing also. I can say to you in Chongqing, the first idea was we went down there, we went, oh my gosh, how many brands do they have? And in the end, we managed to regroup it. You'll see it in a while. It took us a while to think of how to do it because as the chairman, I was a director originally before the chairman. I remember sitting down there and almost literally depressed at how much has to be done. But again, it's like how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So we said, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. Oh, it's confirmed. They do like these brands. So we focus on a structure around good, better, best, rather than only Carlsberg.
So Roland, we are saying that the good integration plan is planned before the buying, the M&A itself, before the transaction.
Yes.
But that first 100 or 200 days allow us to revisit that integration plan and adjust it accordingly, because there are something that we couldn't find or didn't come up in the due diligence or in any assumption, right? So it's like a discipline plan that has to be flexible.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. This is why I say to you, you help the executives by saying, show me your plan. What are you going to do? Then after that, when they come back and report to you and say, we've actually found something else.
Yeah.
But it's important. This is a cross point. Do we or do we not keep the brand? You know, this is a good debate, but this is the kind of debates you want. If you say, I don't have an integration plan, then we started with it. We said, we're going to change all Coca-Cola. Everybody changes Coca-Cola. And they go, why is our sales down? I mean, it actually was because it had a good integration plan. They came back and said, you know what? This is a damn good brand. Don't kill it.
Exactly. And so that lead me to the second question, which is, you said that director has to ask good question.
Yes.
But they cannot ask good question if they don't have the right information.
Correct.
And people who feed them information is management. So how could management feed the right information so that it help board of directors ask a meaningful and the right question about the M&A, the due diligence, the post M&A, the integration?
So I'll give you an example. It might be, for example, when we started, I'll use Chongqing as an example. We said that we're going to have to change the businesses and we were going to be able to get better margins and better procurement. So that's an example. So now we go to the procurement team and the procurement team goes back and looks and says, you know what? I can get a lot better results, but I need to standardize the bottles. The problem is my bottles were of different heights, different sizes. In fact, we didn't have a 330 ml. We had 286, 310, 325, all kinds of variations. So he says, I've got news for you. He said, Roland, I'm going to have to get rid of the bottles. I mean, I sort of like, my eyes nearly popped. I thought I'm talking about getting rid of 300 million bottles. We crushed them, all right? But it was the right decision because we now knew we cannot get the benefits if the bottle heights were different. And every time we had to stop the factory, change the loading, recalibrate, fill, and then change again, stop, refill, this is the 325, stop, refill, 335. You know, we had to standardize all 330, 640, 500 mil. This is nice and easy.
But that's extremely operational thing.
No. But I'm just saying to you, it wasn't. They explained to me they're going to do that, but it meant that, Roland, I'm going to write off 300 million bottles. Sure,
I understand. But we are talking about how can directors help management make it a better M&A.
Yes.
But that is really in detail, but it's really important for the directors to understand what we're doing.
Yes, I'm saying to you, when you spend $1 billion buying that company, you need to understand that you spent $1 billion and how you're going to get that cash back.
Okay.
So the point on here is that the plan said we're going to use the bottles. It cannot work. So now comes the question, shall we take a P&L hit? The answer is yes. Shall we get new bottles in, standardized? It's going to cost me a few 100 million RMB just to order the bottles in. Answer is yes. But now I can get my bottle circulation, standardized, deliveries, all those supposed benefits I thought I was going to get. I couldn't get, but now I can.
Sure. Last question for now is that most of the board of directors are built from organic growth and to serve organic growth. And they have their own duty like a compensation committee, like a risk committee, or like AC. Now suddenly they have to help the management, with this M&A. How would those, conventional or organic structure of the board help the management on new things, which is like, am I right that even the nomination and compensation committee have to ask the right question about the policy, HR policy of the target company? Because in order to, you have to get it right, or risk committee has to oversight the risk of the target company also and the transaction. What's going on, and how would that change the day-to-day life of the organic growth board of directors?
Yeah, it's again a very good question. I can't help but think when you want to do an M&A, be prepared that you need to delve that little bit further, because you're spending big money, maybe up to $1 billion, maybe even more. So you've got to go down and ask yourself, what and how am I going to achieve success? And it might mean restructuring even your board to have what I call a good risk committee and a very good strategy committee. The strategy committee that has experience, that goes down into the details, understands the dynamics of how it works. The risk committee looking at how the leverage, the financial treasury risk, so that you understand all the components of it. And you do normally have good HR skills. The question down here is now, when are you going to implement it? Because we just wish it to happen. It doesn't happen. You have to drive that change, all right? And HR down here, I say to you, has an important job, because it's about changing the culture. The company is going to move from Father Lin to a normal structured management, autonomous decisions made by the individuals, the supervisor in the garage or so. He can't wait for Father Lin to give approval for the new air filter, because that's how it used to work under the old management. Boss even chose how much you could spend on an air filter in a car.
Okay, thank you. That's enough for me right now. I realize that we have a lot more content, so please move on.
Sure, thank you. All right, now I'd like to move on then, therefore, to the topic on the CARLSBERG rapid rebranding exercise, a study on consumer impact on integration. First and foremost, I want to state down here, for me, it has been a privilege to work for both CARLSBERG, Walmart, and for the Kovs-Mayer Group. I'm not here to cast any aspersions on any company. I'm just trying to show you sometimes under pressure, some decisions are better than others. And I just want to share, I want you personally to state what I experienced in the CARLSBERG helped me plan better when I was the chairman of Chongqing, because I experienced it as the executive. I saw some of the decisions and I understand the pressures. So it helped me to plan better when I was in the board of directors. So I'll start again by going through Coles and Bilo to understand. Let's go back. This is in 2006. In Australia, there was a company called the Kovs-Mayer Group. Under the Kovs-Mayer Group, there were two supermarkets that of note. One is the Coles, and the other one was Bilo. Big money. We're talking about $18 billion revenue Australian, and circa about $700 million profit in year 2006. Coles had about 450 stores, and they were located in premium malls, higher margin focus, large quality focus SKU. In fact, now I think you see some of the Coles brands in tops. I see it quite often down there. Good quality, honey, etc. The customer segmentation showed many of them had a higher education and income, and they had what they call a paddock to plate concept. So I know in Coles we killed about 2,000 cows a day, but those 2,000 cows a day went to only 2 abattoirs, and they only came from 2 sources, because we knew that they had been grain fed 60 days before. We know that they come from a particular stock and breeding from particular farmers, so we knew which farmer, and we almost knew the cows and the genetics of the cows, because that was part and parcel of the promise of Coles, a high quality meat, but it wasn't cheap, right? 𝗫𝘁, on the other hand, had 180 stores. It was purchased in 1987. This is interesting. I want to point out down here. 19 years later, they still kept the 𝗫𝘁 brand, all right? And it was known as the cheapest supermarket in Australia. Why? Because it was in the poorer states and regions. So it wasn't in places like there were some stores, but more in the outer suburbs of Melbourne and Sydney. But most of the stores were places like Wollongong, Newcastle, Elizabeth in South Australia, what I call Ballarat and Wyong, the smallest locations where it had what I call a lower income and a different culture, different buying team, but it was well known for fair grade meat. And they did this through abattoir arbitrage. I'll come to that in a second.
They might be selling, 𝗫𝘁 might be selling thumbs up too.
yes, you put it. 𝗫𝘁 would sell thumbs up. Coles would have 6 rows of Coca-Cola, and maybe 1 row of thumbs up, whereas 𝗫𝘁 would have 6 rows of thumbs up and 1 row of Coca-Cola. Yes. Now, the meat arbitrage is a very important point on here. It meant that they went around hunting. The buyer's job was to hunt. Hey, who has excess meat? So they often went to drought regions where a farmer may have 10,000 cows, and they go, it's going to be a drought. I'll take 3,000 from you now, so that you reduce your risk of a drought and losing all your cattle. And they buy it, and then they sell it so they got it cheap, and they sell it cheap. The quality was whatever was available. Sometimes it's South Australia, sometimes it's Queensland, sometimes it's New South Wales. You never knew where it was going to come from, but these guys were hunters for what they call arbitrage. And that's how they did, and they did a great job. They sold the meat at about nearly half the price of the Coles meat. Coles meat was standardized quality, but 𝗫𝘁 always came at a lower price. Let's now understand what happened to the Coles-Myer Group. As mentioned to you, 𝗫𝘁 and Coles were part of the Coles-Myer Group. In 2006, revenue was about 36 billion, so it's twice the size, because it had Target, Kmart, Liquorland, the Shell Retail and Office Works. And then Myer later, as I mentioned to you, was sold to TPG. Profit after tax was about $1 billion. Right? Market cap, 11 billion at $10 per share. In August 2006, 𝗬𝘁𝗀𝗵𝗿 and Roberts came over and offered $14.50 per share, and then $15.25 per share, valuing the company now at 17 billion. The company was 10 billion, it was about $11 per share, and somebody had made an offer of $15.25. The share price shot up to $15.25. And as far as we knew, the value of our company at $10 per share was a fair value for $1 billion profit. If you look at that, roughly about 10 times. Suddenly now, the price was $15.25 or $17 billion, and now we're going, how do we do this? So the board directors came up and said they were rejecting the offer because they said the company was worth more, and announced a new strategic driver with the creation of the Food, Liquor and Fuel Group. It was going to convert the 𝗫𝘁 stores into Coles stores as a key profit driver to drive the profit up and combine with the Shell retail outlets. This is the driver, and this is how we're going to get the results. And that's why we can reject the offer, because we're going to do better than 17 billion market share. 17 billion market cap, we're going to do better than $15.25 per share. The reality is that within 6 months, the strategy unraveled. Okay, 𝗫𝘁 experienced negative sales. Consumers regularly recorded grievances on talkback radio and in the papers. But I can say one thing, thankfully, we didn't have Twitter, TikTok, because I would go crazy if we had that in today's world. They were critical of all this, what had happened, the change that had happened. And by May 2007, Coles announced the slowest sales growth in 7 years and gave a profit warning. So now they had to put the company back on the market. And by October 2007, literally 1 year later, Wesfarmers buys the Coles Group for $19 billion at $17.25. The board of directors did well there in that they got a good price, $15.25 up to $17.25 from $10 before. They did a good job, but I'm only here to discuss about that strategy, that quick conversion, and was that right? And we're going to ask ourselves, what went wrong? It starts with the objectives, all right? The objective was profit. Remember I said, focus on cash, not profit. This is profit drive. So suddenly now you're pushing everything that you want to do. And behind that, let's look at the consumer dynamics. For 19 years, we knew that this company was different. We didn't want to change bylaw because we knew it was different from Coles. But suddenly now we're going to convert them all into Coles. It's not that it cannot be done. By the way, the new owners of Coles have done it, but they did it by winning the consumers over by lowering the price of milk to $1. All right. And they've done it, and now they won over and managed to convert. But you need to win over the customers. You just can't force it onto them. That's the key point I want to say down here. All right. Culture and consumers, they had different demographics, different customers, and they had different needs. And I want to share with you one of the postmortems I had to do because I was the GM of finance in the supermarkets group, and I had to go and do what happened. And I met an old lady, and I actually had the report in the end. She was a grandmother, and she explained why she hated that transition. To us, we changed the quality of the meat. Bilo now had Coles quality meat, fantastic quality, marbling fat. We can tell you the provenance of where this cow came from. But for her, she used to buy 1 kilo of meat for $10 because it's cheap arbitrage. She had it on roast on Sunday, and all her grandchildren came. Now, she only could get 700 grams, which meant that the grandchildren said that she was a skinflint. She was being a cheapskate. They got less to eat. That's how she looked at it. For her, it was embarrassing that she could only buy 700 grams for $10 when she used to be able to buy 1 kilo and serve all the children. So to her, Bilo had failed her. You may claim it's better quality meat, but it's not what she wanted. So these are the kind of things you need to work through before you just say, I'm changing the brand. Leadership in turmoil. I mean, as I told you, I said, this was interesting because it came from the top and came down, and many of us in the supermarkets looked at each other and said, how are we going to do this? Sort of, we didn't have a plan. It was a top down, push it down, and there was no plan on how to do it. So there was a lack of buy-in in what happened. Perhaps the most painful statement I would say down here is Mick McMahon, who is my boss, the COO of the CARLSBERG Group. In front of the audience and the public, and this is one of the probably the strongest quote I ever heard. A strategy you cannot execute is probably not the right strategy. He used to be a Shell guy, by the way. I mean, that I think what sums it up on about a business. Unless you have the right integration plan, you can run it and execute the business. You don't actually have a business. You don't have an M&A. The M&A is not complete until it's executable. That's the key point. I'll stop at this stage before I go to Chongqing. Any questions at all?
I just learned that your first key takeaway, understand the value driver. Sometimes the acquirer get confused between the value driver that they think it is from the financial point of view, which is different from the value point or the value driver of the consumer, like that grandmother.
Yes. But this is exactly what I said. The value driver in the case of the directors, I can get a higher 10% profit higher because the meat is more expensive. No, it doesn't work that way. The consumer went, I hate it. I'm never going to buy from you again. See, this is my point I'm trying to say down here. You've got to start thinking from a consumer. And that's why I said, understand the details. I know it's painful. Directors like to be strategic and say, Yes, all this is the executives. But when you have $1 billion at stake, it's your business. That's what basically I'm suggesting.
It sounds to me like M&A, ego management is very important. You want to be right all the time, but along the way, if you admit that sometimes you can be wrong and you accept that, the bottom director accept the mistake of the management on due diligence on key assumptions, you can move on.
Yes.
And you can adjust. But yeah, okay.
But that's exactly what I was saying. Why I said when you have this meeting, you hone, both you and the executives get to understand the business better. You didn't know everything. It was a classic, you DD, they give you 14 days, all the data is dumped down there. You can't figure out half of the statements are in different language or, sort of like a different style of accounting. I mean, it's complicated. And then suddenly now you're going to try and understand. So you did your best. In a DD, you had maybe 14 days, 1 month before you made the offer. Now you know the business. What are you doing different? I mean, you 200 days, you now know the business. You can't say, I don't know. I now know it. It's crazy out there in the West. It's, it's the details. You got to know it.
So the board of director after the acquisition, he might say to the management, okay, confess, and I will reward you.
I don't call it confess. I actually say share, because both of us are. So what did we assume? What's different?
Exactly.
What do you recommend? It's the classic dialogue between you and the executives. If you don't have that dialogue, you just sit down and go, very good, thank you. And lots of PowerPoint and nobody really understands, yes, we're going to go for the growth. And then nobody's be able to discuss. You need to go through that discussion. That meat plan showed it's a failure. Interestingly enough, West farmers, like I said, realized that. And the first thing they did was they said, we're going to bring the price of milk down really low for both buy low and Coles. And then now we can merge the buy low and Coles, because we say we are really, the first ads were called down, 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 all about bringing prices down. We are like you, buy low. You're getting better value with Coles and low prices still,
Okay, that is a very smart move. Okay, next to CARLSBERG.
Chongqing. I'll probably want to talk about Chongqing down here. And this is about the long road to integration of a public listed company. Chongqing, just explained, was first opened in 1958. Those of you know Chinese, they have a brand called 𝗬𝗚, which is basically 1958 because they're very proud of the year it was built, right? Chongqing, for those of you not familiar, is in the center of China. Think of China, everybody talks of Shanghai, Beijing, Guangdong. It's all on the eastern seaboard. I'm talking about take a dart, throw it into the center, bullseye China, you hit Chongqing, all right? And you might be familiar with it because of Sichuan food. It's a beautiful part of the world. I love that part. And but it's very different, all right? Very, very what I call central China. It had a culture. I talked about production driven, then consumer driven. I even joked before. I said, when am I going to get the Order of Lenin for my production? I mean, that's how it was. The medals were awarded people who made, not sold. What does that mean? For Chinese New Year, they introduced special green bottles, blue bottles, bunny bottles, or tiger bottles. I mean, these are impossible to use for the next 12 years. I mean, you gotta, what are you gonna do with those bottles? That's one example. So they were saying, I sold them. People loved it. But I said, the bottles can't be used. Yeah, I know, but we got them there. It's an asset in the books. And this is why you had to change that whole thinking. Then, of course, it's the 1990s and the early 2000s. Everything was about bigger is better. So Chongqing went into the eastern seaboard. They went to Zhejiang, Jiangsu, Anhui, which is all near Shanghai area, and even went to Guangdong. And by the way, they also, because they went into biotechnology. And I even asked them, why did you go into biotechnology? They said, well, we had microscopes that allowed us to look at the yeast. So we figured out we should be a biotechnology company. I think it's quite removed from looking at a microscope into claiming that you're a biotech company, but it was anything to get prices moving. All right. Like I said, cultural expansion, and by 2011, the profits fell by 50%. No surprise. EBIT was only about 200 million RMB, which is roughly about $30 million US. We had our first bite in 2008 in CARLSBERG, And then 60% achieved in December 2013, but it required the purchase of that poisonous eastern acids that came with it. So what do we have? 23 breweries, 2 malting plants throughout China in the southwest, northeast, and eastern provinces. So the plan basically was in 3 parts. We knew that in order to finish this, our aim was to get what I call a one China beer business. The whole Carlsberg China wanted to become one business. But we had a 3-part plan, all right? Classically, stop the bleeding, stabilize, and regrow. This is a standard, what I call M&A template. Stop the bleeding, stabilize, and then regrow. So phase 1, it meant downsizing, reorganization, rebranding from about 2013 to 2016, all right? Removing of all those risks. Phase 2 is about introducing premium brands and focus on financial performance. And then phase 3 is now true growth, expansion new markets, and it allowed us to do what we call a material asset restructure, which is probably a topic for another time on how you do a material asset restructure in a public listed business. So phase 1, we had DD issues. The day I took over, I remember I was slapped with a summons from the environmental authorities that we had an illegal pipe that flowed straight into 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗂𝗃. We all looked at each other and said, what are you talking about? It says, your wastewater plant went straight. Wastewater, skipped the wastewater plant and went straight into the 𝗂𝗂𝗀𝗃𝗃. And we didn't even know there was this pipe. It existed. And the reason why it was there, so it was to save $1 million a year in wastewater treatment. Of course, it's illegal. I could have argued in due diligence that misrepresentation, and we could have had 5 years of legal fights and spend more time on that than anything else. But we agreed, pay the fine, change it, get our wastewater plant working correctly. That's an example of, like I said, you got a bad issue, deal with it. Don't try and fester and, he said, she said arguments. We knew that we didn't want some of these breweries. So it meant 3,000 redundancies that had been negotiated with provincial and local government. And here's the example of what I mean. Looking at the integration plan, which brewery are we going to close? When? Who's informing the local government? Who's going to sell the land? You see, like I said, you break it down into components. That's an example. Sorry, any questions at this stage? No? All right, then I'm going to say focus on cash and not revenue or P&L. We closed 15 of those breweries. I'll go back again. We had 23 breweries. And the first thing we did, 23 at the bottom, I closed 15. Like, you nuts. You bought it and you closed 15. Well, the answer is that they're not profitable and they are actually going to be a distraction. Close them. And the malting plants, we buy malt cheaper than we could make in those plants. Right? I told you about the 300 million bottles that were rabbit bottles and tiger bottles. We crashed them into what they call cullets, right? Cullets, and we sold it to try to get some money from there. Very painful. P&L hit -1 billion in the first year. Can you imagine this director standing up down there saying, -1 billion profit for you? I mean, you can imagine we didn't go down very well, but we had to do what we had to do. But the important thing was that we sold the land, we got the cash, all right? Culture and people. This is something I thought that we're in the center. So the skills, when you hear about China, the great technological skills, it was mainly in the Eastern Seaboard. So we had to bring in skilled finance, marketing, management from either Europe or the Eastern Seaboard of China to build that skill in Chongqing, right? Because they didn't have those skills. They were different management. It meant that you also had to change the distribution model. So you see the details? You had to go down to how we sold it. We have to change it by providing higher incentives. Systems and processes, we had to change to the Carlsberg chart of accounts. New ERP for the first 6 breweries. Then after that, we'll do the rest. Brewery asset management to increase turnover. Financial and procurement, supply chain, all these stuff, details of who's doing the wheat buy, who's doing the malt buy, who's doing the bottle buy, so that we can get better prices, and cardboard and size of cardboard. I mean, there's a lot of detail that management has to do. But you need to be able to say, we have a plan to convert to get our prices and our procurement savings in cardboard, 5 million, in bottles, 10 million, so that we know where we're getting the benefits from, right? So I would know that, for example, in procurement, we plan to get $100 million benefit. It's made up of these 5 drivers, and then That's for management to work out. But I'm going to ask, how are these 5 drivers going? And they go, paper, we're getting it, glass, we're getting it, but we're still not getting it in transportation also. And then we go through those discussions. Cash generation, sales of superfluous breweries. So again, you drive the cash. We close the breweries, we sell it. This is what I want to share down here. It's only 39. I've showed 39 here. But the reality was that in 2013, there were 500 SKUs, 100 bottle types. I'm just showing you an example of what does it look like. 100 bottle types. Remember, every time I change the bottle, I have to change the filling nipple. I have to change the whole process. The cardboard boxes are all different. So now we only have 20 bottle types. It's simplified the whole process. If you look carefully, they're actually all the same height. Many of them are almost the same height, because then it makes it easier. And all of them are 330 mils, 500 mils, and 640, rather than every variation that you had. So, but you know this is painful, right? You have to do this. Yeah, I didn't do this. It's the branding team. They changed it, and behind this change was they introduced a brand. So they said they had all these fancy brands like 𝗂𝗏𝗏, and we changed it just down to the CARLSBERG brands plus Chongqing. So it had a hot pot as a one standard brand. We rebuilt that brand. So it wasn't CARLSBERG, it was actually Chongqing beer. So we bought Chongqing Brewery. First thing we did was introduce Chongqing, the brand. And it resonated well because people love their Chongqing, and then it's the hot pot, the famous 𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁, which they love eating the spicy steamboat. So it helped them in the process. Okay. Phase 2, now we're making some real good progress. We bring in some premium beers like 1664, which is a nice wheat beer, a French wheat beer. We go out to the geographic reach, but notice we didn't go what I call the London, New York, Paris, Rio de Janeiro, and Tokyo. No, we actually went around Sichuan and Guizhou. So we didn't go around the whole of China. We just went to Sichuan, which is Chengdu, all right, that area, and Guizhou, just next door, the next door states. That's a concentric ring growth. So I would suggest to you, especially if you're planning growth, think of it in what I call stages rather than trying to jump around multiple continents. Think of it, capture one location well before you move to the next. Then it was about financial performance, focus on cash generation. By 2016, free cash flow was over $200 million a year. You might say, how did they do that? Well, inventory percentage falls, spare parts percentage falls, so your assets are a lot lower. Your accounts receivable, you only give it to good customers, and you try not to give it. You make sure you get a bottle liability, so you get cash upfront. And then you also have, you've got very good accounts payable. You tell everybody, I don't pay until 120 days, but you know me, I will pay at the 120th day. And we got that credit. And that's what happens when you do that, your free cash flow improves. And the focus on profit also allows you to get good cash. Phase 3, that's the big picture where we do the entire restructure and into one entity. And I can say to you that Yibin, a 6 million hectoliter brewery, was commissioned. Tiandao was expanded, Tianmenhu recommissioned. And by the way, I was the last of the non-Mandarin speakers because now all the executives are fluent in Mandarin. When I was the chairman, I made it a rule that the meeting was held in Chinese, in Mandarin, because it was out of respect. It was China, and it was my fault that I didn't speak the language and I didn't know it. So I had a translator next to me to make sure I understood what was happening. Yes, difficult for me, but it's not about me. It's about the customers and the shareholders, right? Let's look at some of the results. What I want to share with you down here is on the left. First of all, let's look at some of the numbers. What I want to share with you down there is that if you look at it, 2017, 2019, sales increased 3.1 to 3.5 billion, only 400 million, not much in there. The key is look at the EBITDA, 496 to 832. See how it's the profitability, because now your procurement savings are coming in. Your cost of doing business is lower. You don't have all those unprofitable businesses. You can make good profit, right? And year 2020 is when we did the material asset restructure. We put all the businesses in, and you can see that the numbers jump, but that's more a conglomeration and a bit more difficult topic, which I'll cover another time. From a shareholder point of view, we bought it at 24 RMB a share. Most of the time, it was like nobody loved us, so it was down to about 19 RMB a share. Today it closed at 100, or yesterday it closed at 124 RMB a share. So it's gone up about 6 times. That gives you an idea of how you do it. But let's run through again. Did we know the value drivers? We closed the businesses. We handled the tax, the bottles, got rid of all the risk. We deal with the key value driver, rebuild the brand into Chongqing. Deep dive into culture. It's about things like, for example, you had to change the culture from a communist thinking business to an entrepreneur business. You had to change your geographic footprint. You think of looking at focus on cash. Like I said, by 2016, 200 million cash. Profit-wise, 300 million or so. Not much. It's the cash that was great, right? And then, noting that integration is a long game, we dealt with those issues that happened, all right? And that's why you get the valuation that you get. I now want to look at point number 5, where more than 50% of M&A fail. We got to come to terms with it. That happens. As a director, you must know that is part and parcel of the risk, and we need to ensure that executives continue to extract as much value as they can. It's human nature, like I said. When things get tough, and ugly and dirty and all that, everybody wants to move on to the next new, sexy and attractive thing. But we got to deal with the issues. Again, focus on cash generation and ROIC, demand reviews, go through it, details, try and get the ROIC up. Like I said, move it to at least your weighted average cost of capital, around 8% or whatever it is. But like I said, you've got to go in with a good strategic eye, and I call it a baleful, almost a malicious kind of a no. I'm starting with a position of no before I say yes. You've got to know that bad money drives out good, and the solution is not more capex, new branding again. You got to know. Sometimes you have to stop, and if that happens, prepare to exit. This is the cost of doing M&A. Sometimes you stuff up. That happens, but nobody wants to deal with it. They'd like to, like, next board of directors can deal with it. No, it's our duty to deal with it. All right. So final takeaway, I'll go back again. 5 principles of integration. 1, understand the value drivers and risks. 2, deep dive into culture, geographic, and consumer dynamics. This is really important. Many of you are very good at this because you come from the sales background, right? Focus on cash, not P&L. I'll explain to you. Because sometimes you have to do things that hurt the P&L, but cash is important. 4, integration is a long game. And 5, prepare to handle underperformance. I will now close my meeting by showing it's there so that you can have it on the how to calculate terminal value. It's not today, but it's there for those of you who are interested, those of you who love your maths, and those who don't. Anyway, it's still fun to have it down there as part of it. All right, I will stop at this point. Has anybody got any questions for me?
Yeah, Kun Roland, many thanks. There are some questions from the floor. This question, it appears CARLSBERG has not done enough due diligence on market risk, understand consumer behavior before taking M&A, not to mention the integration process. What advice do you have for board director to be more vigilant on M&A activities?
I'll start with, like I said, you start with a position. Anybody says we're going to do major changes, you need to ask the market research. What market research says you can do this major change? Like I go back to the thumbs up just now. I suspect Coca-Cola will take over the factories and convert it all to Coke. And somebody went, whoa, this is what we found. And it gave an opportunity for management and the directors to review and rethink, understand the consumer dynamics, do a test. I want to again emphasize, I think the Coles board of directors did a great job in many things, but not in this one. Why? Because KKR flew in their private jet, came in and said, here's an offer, and they go, how the hell do we compete with this? So they made up a strategy. That wasn't smart. Okay, or they didn't make it up, they rushed a strategy. Right? And that, I think, is unfortunate. They rushed the strategy, so it didn't have the details. So I start with, if they're going to do this, if someone suggests to you, we're going to rebrand, you ask a simple question. Have you got market research for it? And maybe in the first 100 days, can you show me the market research? That's all. And it's, you don't say you cannot or you must not. You ask, what evidence have you got? That's all. Is that the right question, right? What evidence have you got? And can we trial it in one state first or two locations first, and let's see.
Okay, the next question, Kun Roland. If IRR show the lower number than the cost of equity, what should board director do? Or in case that it is a strategic move, any factor that board of the
This is painful. This one is painful. Okay, you got your internal rate of return that's lower than cost of equity. I mean, you're not even covering your WACC. You can't even cover your equity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the key test is not so much. The key question down here is you got to ask yourself. Number one, what can we do? Like I said, what can we do? Can we still get it to a respectable weighted average cost of capital? Remember, debt is cheaper. So you don't just look at return on equity, you got to look at it in terms of the WACC rate. That's why I always suggest the WACC rate. If you can't even get it to the WACC rate, then you got to ask yourself, component selling, maybe even total exit. Just, you got it wrong. I mean, it happens. I've never met anybody who got it all right. Okay, I must say to you, I've done quite a few M&As, and some of them, I must admit, I go back and cringe. Why did I think that? I mean, it happens. I'm just saying to you, we're human. We make mistakes. Move on.
Yeah.
Okay? Or try and do as much as you can to get it past the weighted average cost of capital. That's important.
Roland, I saw a lot of Thai business right now that are big and expand abroad, and many are buying know-how and innovation in Europe or in the US.
Yeah.
From your wisdom of the integration M&A, how do they make the best out of their acquisition? Because the integration, the calculation of it's not easy, because that is innovation, that is know-how.
I'll actually say to you down there, your biggest challenge down there is culture.
Yeah.
How do you integrate this innovative business with your public listed business or your big patriarchal business? I mean, they are used to this free thinking. Like I said, they sit down on yoga mats to decide what they want to do. I mean, and you are now, you want to have a proper board meeting, and it's kind of like, you look at each other like, which planet are you from? I mean, that's the reality. So start with culture. Understand, if you want to be able to keep that innovation, how do I keep the innovation? What culture should I share? How do I still manage the risk then? How do I integrate what I can integrate? How do I ensure that their skills come through the organization? So the key integration question, how much of that information flows through your organization? And you might set what I call performance targets that are based on innovation implementation. Yeah. Something like that. It's difficult. They're all very difficult. They are great questions. I really need to look at each business individually to understand where the value drivers, but I can sense this one is going to be a culture and understanding the dynamics. So you like I said, look at Elon Musk and what's happening in Twitter. It's kind of like almost like a circus at times, It's amazing that you read about it every day. But maybe he's got it right. I don't know. But I must say to you, it's quite unconventional the way he's doing things.
Okay. Well, how time flies. Let's go, Roland. Shall we go back to that page with the 5 key takeaways?
Sure.
I think it's probably the most important.
Okay, let's go there.
Kind of reflect on this. So the first one, understand the value driver and risk. And this is not the value driver from the acquirer's perspective only, but the value driver of the consumer.
Correct. So we start with, you assume that you're going to get value driver, you're going to get procurement. You're going to get gross margin improvement of 500 basis points, right? Don't stop there. How are you going to get that 500 basis points? And they're going to say it's procurement savings, it's going to be higher price points, that's how we get the 500 basis points. Then measure that, all right? So what will I see in the first year? What will I see in the first 100 days, 200 days, first year, year 2? Because sometimes this change may take a while. So just know your value drivers. Someone said, oh, we're going to reduce costs. The back office, yes, but it might take you 2 years when the systems are ready. So just again, because when you do the valuations, the models, the merchant bankers models will always just go quickly, and it was all done in year one. It's fantastic, it's wonderful, it's beautiful.
How close should a board of directors work with the management, given that a typical board of director might meet like 6 times per year, and we are talking about this 100 days, which is like a short period of so how does it happen?
So here's the question now here. I mean, if the board of directors are unable to do it, I would suggest forming a strategy committee or risk committee that does this evaluation and comes back to the board, says, look, but this committee must meet on the 100 days, 200 days, what I call understanding review, and they must do that review, because there's too much money at stake. I mean, some of these deals are into $1 to $5 billion. You're probably increasing your debt profile from debt to EBITDA to about 3 times. I mean, this is changing your business. I mean, what used to be, I know what I did in Thailand, to suddenly now I'm in a new country and I just spent $1 billion, and they're saying they're finding things. So you need to go into the details. What's going well, what's not going well, so that you can understand it and help, because you're helping management. Don't make it sound as if like you are testing management. You're actually helping management when you get at the plan and you review the plans together, because then they feel also that you are sharing the risk with them.
Yeah, I like that word, sharing the risk together.
M&As are hell.
Yeah, I know, and sometimes I think management. I think that management want to be seen in a safe zone too.
Yes, I'll share with you one that when we took over the Chongqing business, right? I had a chat with the CFO of China, and I said to him, how's your month-end performance? He says, Roland, quite honestly, I don't know. He said, the original start was sometimes they didn't report.
Okay.
So he says, I had to go there, and I said, I'm adding it up literally spreadsheet by spreadsheet, because they don't have a system. They don't have, and I realized, my gosh, here I am imagining that we can get all this. He doesn't have the system to help him do the basics.
How could you keep track with all the measure of that 100 days, 200?
Exactly.
Okay, the next one, deep dive the culture, geographic and consumer dynamic. I jotted down that like Chongqing, they are so proud of being a production hub that is it's like a powerhouse of production hub.
Yes.
But we have to turn them into like a consumer marketing driven. So that is that what we mean by deep dive into what's going on, the culture, the belief of the people in that business, and how to turn them.
So first of all, you need to understand what is the culture and how are you going to change it, or how you're going to adapt to work with your business with this new culture. I mean, you've got to come to, in our case, we say we can't because they are production driven. It doesn't work that way. We have to be here. I would call it a consumer driven industry. So we didn't blame people. We actually explained that this is how we're going to look and measure. So we had to change the incentives down to the sales staff, giving them new incentives. We had to change the whole dynamics, like I said. And so we knew that we also had to change the distribution profitability curve. We had to, so it's into the details. In terms of geographic, like I said to you, don't underestimate the informal where, I mean, Kulvech, we've met so many times where I can just chat to you and say, oh gosh, I stuffed up here or something like that. It's easy. It's harder when it's formal. Oh yes, I'm here to report, and here's my PowerPoint slide, blah, blah, kind of you don't want to, because it's kind of hard when it's distant. It's always easier when, I think this is much hard. It's getting to be much harder than I thought. So sometimes it means regular travel. To put it in perspective, I did over 100 flights a year to all the countries that I worked in. some of the more difficult ones like Chongqing and all. I probably did about a dozen flights. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to
I'm totally
understand.
with you on that. It's human to human transaction.
Yes. And
Yeah.
listening to them is fantastic when you're actually on the ground and you actually love it. You know, when they see the passion also in you with working on the bottled yards and seeing how it makes so much a difference to everyone because they actually realize that you care also.
Exactly.
Right? So
it's not like
your presence actually makes a difference as a director.
Number three, focus on cash and not the P&L. You have made it clear that profit is important. You earn it, and I think people tend to count profit as KPI. To me, can I compare profit to food that you hunt and you get the food and you can sell it, but cash is oxygen.
I think that's a very good analogy because the cash, turning the cash. I mentioned to you the TPG example. They sold some of the clothing at a loss, but you know what? It's cash. It's cash they could pay the debt. This is the point down here. No point in fictitious valuation of assets, etc., or PPA adjustments. They dealt with it. Take the P&L hit because they are private equity. So what? Cash is important. Cash came in, paid off the debt, and that's the secret behind it. Then now that they've paid off all that, it gives them now money to spend on proper marketing, spend money on rebranding. You see what I mean? And that's what I always said to my team. I'm not taking the money away from you. I'm taking the money to give you a better chance to go and do better marketing of your brand.
And you also mentioned that don't be fooled by the numbers, like all these, what do they call, purchase price adjustment and others. At the end of the day, it's cash, right?
Yes, it's cash that matters because I can do a purchase price adjustment, so it moves out from my. So, for example, if my stock is overvalued by 100 million, I can say stock reduced to 0 by 100, and I move 100 million to goodwill. Oh, very nice. No P&L impact. No P&L impact because you got 1 year to do a purchase price adjustment. And you do that, no impact at all. Nobody will know. Accounting focus.
Okay, next one is integration is a long game. I listened to your Chongqing and that's phase 1, phase 2, and 3. 1 is to resize and refocus. Phase 2 is to regeneration of cash. And phase 3 is business restructuring. Am I right?
Yeah, so we ran through. In the case of Chongqing, it was business restructuring. But I think number 1 is that you stop the bleeding. The crazy stuff that goes on, the buying more bottles, the wrong bottles, running factories that are unnecessary. Get rid of all those things, focus on cash. What we said. So it's a long game, get that. But then phase 2 is that you had to change the systems, processes, so that you can get all that benefits of the procurement that you said you're going to have. It needed one ordering system. So you needed to know how much packaging you would require. So small thing example, instead of ordering 10 different sizes of cartons, we only ordered 2. So it's easy. So that now our price savings come in. That's the kind of what I call, it's a long game. And then you got to, and like I said, it might be factory number 1 before you go to factory number 2 and factory number 3. The guys are working from one location to another. Yeah. And I can tell you that, for example, in our case, our operational guys had to work what they call COM, the standard procedures. But it's like, it's really repeat 10 times before they can go to the next location. Repeat 10 times before they go to the next location. It's not going to happen overnight. It takes a couple of years.
And last but not least, prepare to handle underperformance. It's almost like thing will not go as it is, and what you have to do to kind of regain what you expect, and also worst come to worst, when to separate.
Correct. And it starts again. I know when things are going bad, nobody wants it. Nobody likes to deal with a bad issue. So you'll find that they tend to want to move to the next item. You got to get them back to, no, you got to get this up to the whack rate. Get it to the whack rate. I didn't ask you to get it past the old score, but you're giving them a new target. Get it to the whack rate, right? But sometimes that it just can't be done. Then you have to act. You have to act. recognize, sorry, mistake, move on. All right.
A lot of ego management.
I go back again. What was in the thing? It's about dynamics, it's understanding the culture, the people, you know. It goes back there again. People, change management is about people, the culture is about people, you know. Whether you're going to plan to have around what I call the management and directors must work very closely in M&A. It's not easy. It's very, very hard.
Roland, there is one more question, and I think that this is going to be the last question. Does embarking on new business require same planning as M&A?
Sorry, can I hear the question again, please?
Does embarking on new business require same planning as M&A? I think what they meant is that, you know, you start a brand new business.
Brand new business. I think it's there are always slight variances, but the principle again is you're going into something new. You're going into a new location. You're going to a new business. If you are in, for example, the retail business, and now you're going into telecommunications, it's so question down here. What's your skill levels? Who are the people? The same issues down here. You know, what do you know? How do you get there? You know, somewhat similar, but there are differences. But I would say if you think of in terms of principles, you need to understand where the value drivers. Do you really know? Because it's a totally new business. Do you understand the risk going into telecommunications from retail? I mean, or banking? Do you understand what kind of culture and consumer dynamics? I mean, it's new to you because you are. I mean, there are a lot of retailers who have gone into banking also, and because they want to do the retail banking. But do you really understand? And how do you get that business going? Yeah, same principles are there.
Yeah, same principle, but maybe less skeleton under the carpet.
yes, that's right.
but and also maybe less gain because M&A might be more promising in some.
That's true. Okay. It's hard to tell.
Roland, that was a very insightful 1.5 hours, and this is great. And you know, the audience, if you want to hear some more of this integration, if you think that today is just the beginning and there could be some other aspect because it's such a huge topic, please let us know. I would like to thank everyone for, you know, spend your time with us and support Thai-IOD. Thanks to Indorama Venture Public Company Limited for supporting the activities. And please, the evaluation form is going to help you make the most out of us and what we do. The more you respond, the better it will get, I promise. So with that, thank you very much, Kun Roland. It was fun and very insightful.
Thank you again.
ขอบคุณมากครับ สวัสดีครับ
สวัสดีครับ